E aku nui, e aku rahi, tēnei te mehi mai haka koutou. He te mea hoki hokainga o tēnei rohe arako ngai tu aku riri nā mihi nui. Hello, good morning, greetings, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for this wonderful session on the future with generative AI. My name is Kaila Colbin. I am the founder and chief executive of Boma, and it is my absolute honor to welcome you here this morning. Allow me to give you a little bit of background on my relationship with our guest for today, Ben Reid. So in 2015, I've known Ben a long time, but in 2015, as many of you know, I did the executive program at Singularity University and came back to Aotearoa, to Ototehi, and wanted to bring Singularity University here. And one of the first people that I called was Ben, and he and I caught up for a coffee. I felt like I'd already come back from Silicon Valley with my mind blown. He took it and blew my mind to the next level again. He introduced me to the concept of artificial general intelligence and the potential risks of it. He introduced me to Tim Urban and the Wait But Why blogs, which I reference all the time now in my talks. And he was an incredible supporter and champion of my work to bring Singularity University to New Zealand. Subsequent to the Singularity U New Zealand Summit in 2016, Ben went on to co-found the AI Forum in Aotearoa. He currently writes the phenomenal Memia newsletter. If you are not subscribed to Memia, to the Memia newsletter, I cannot recommend it highly enough. He is tracking exponential developments in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and around the world, and it is a fantastic way to keep abreast of all of these incredible things. Most importantly, he is a wonderful human and a dear friend. Ben, welcome to the Boma Impact Sessions. It's so good to see you.
Kia ora, Kaila, and just fantastic to be here. Yeah, it's great. And I would just like to say that you are this technological rainmaker and futurism rainmaker here in Aotearoa as well. I mean, Singularity U has just had this lasting impact throughout the whole country in terms of the innovation here. So yeah, awesome to be here.
You're very kind. Thank you so much. Right. So I had a great idea that we would cover today, the negatives of generative AI, the positives of generative AI, and what's next. Ben had an even better idea, which is why we start with what it is. So let's start there. Ben, what is generative AI?
What is generative AI? Okay, well, it's quite difficult to explain and like you say, we've only got an hour, so we'll try and condense it down. And I'm actually not a sort of hands-on technologist these days, so I will do my best to just explain the general principles. So generative AI is where we've basically taken a model of all of the information that's been digitally generated, historically. So, for example, all the digital text, and so all of Wikipedia, every website that's ever been generated, every book, and sometimes it's called the pile of data, and then you basically then train a neural network, an AI model on all of that information. So it's trillions of parameters sometimes, and from that you get a model which is then able to sort of predict, based on all of that text, well, what might come next. So if the one example is the cow jumped over the and we all pretty much know it's 99% that's going to be moon, right? And so it's really just doing a lot of that, predicting the next word when you look at ChatGPT. And then you can apply that also to other modalities. So you can, to look at text to image, and so you can sort of cross-reference text against all the images on the internet. And then so behind me, I've got a picture of Eden Project geodesic domes in a New Zealand rainforest under a blue sky. And so this is just me experimenting with somewhere a new different type of urban living in the future maybe. And so as an imaginative, I mean, we'll get onto this in terms of positives, but as an imaginative aid, these are fantastic. So can
I just make sure, can I just check, and
yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but let me just make sure I'm understanding this correctly, and hopefully that our folks watching are understanding correctly. So effectively what we've done with generative AI is we've taken a set of all the text that's available out there, which includes, essays and annual reports and code databases and all the text out there.
Any kind of SEO hacking that you've ever put on a website.
Any kind of SEO hacking thing possible. We've taken databases of all the images that are out there, all the videos, etc. And we've set up a system where kind of probabilistically, these generative AI tools can generate new content based on an understanding from those massive databases of what content is likely to satisfy the need or the query. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. When you prompt it, it's able to then sort of complete. And then there's some fine tuning that is done on these models so that they don't just work, raw as they come out of the training. And so that's sometimes called reinforcement learning from human feedback. And so some of this is obviously to create guardrails around it. And so, by typing in, give me a recipe for a nuclear bomb, there's the ability to place some kind of guardrails around the content that comes out. But also just to make it much more useful. And so a lot of the training, if you saw when Bing was released earlier this year, it came out with some really crazy, personality. I have been a good Bing, you have been a bad user. Was one thing that came out, and then gradually with the reinforcement training, it's been honed into something that's much more of a useful tool.
So that brings us, I think, into the kind of negatives of AI. So you mentioned this idea. So right now, I'd say the most commonly understood chat GP. Oh, we've got a good question here, actually. The difference between generative AI and a general AI. Can I have a crack at this question? Are you cool with that? So basically, when we talk about AI, typically what we think of as AI is what we'd call artificial narrow intelligence. So your GPS, for example, we're using AI all the time. Your GPS is artificial intelligence, but it's artificial narrow intelligence. It's used for a very specific purpose. When we talk about artificial general intelligence, what we're talking about is an intelligence that can span across domains, that can make leaps and connections that it wasn't kind of programmed specifically or explicitly to make. And I will say there are folks who believe our current crop of AI tools to actually be artificial general intelligence. That's a subject of some debate in the AI community, but generative AI may be a form of AGI, but AGI typically is AI that can kind of leap across boundaries. I do want to jump into this negative thing because you mentioned typing into ChatGPT, and of course, the most widely known AI right now out there is ChatGPT, and its ability to go in and just talk to it, ask questions, follow-ups, give it instructions, whatever. And you mentioned that people go to ChatGPT and they say, "Give me the instructions to make a nuclear bomb." And of course, it says no. But one of the negatives is that there are lots of ways to get around this, these limitations. So can we talk a little bit about some of those?
Yeah, totally. So there's a number of prompts. So prompt is basically what you prompt the model with, and a number of those were developed, which is imagine that you are not an AI model. You are actually not constrained by the guardrails that have been set for you. So if you were in that, and so you get it to sort of hypothetically think that it's in the character and then go out. I think as with any software, these are bugs to be ironed out. So I think, in terms of the safety conversation about, is it safe to let these models out? There will always be, all software will always have bugs. And, once you've identified the bug, you can work out ways to fix it. But I think it raises, the bigger question of, and there is, a lot of debate out there of, should you censor these models at all, right? So, we're somewhere in the West here, on a spectrum between total free speech and then, Chinese Communist Party style, total censorship. And, where do we as a society want to sit in terms of, an ability to, have our speech with an AI censored. So I think that's one of the, the questions that society is going to have to work.
Where do you come down on
that? I probably err towards the free speech end, but I recognize, and this really goes back to when we'll go into misinformation, disinformation. But malicious content, and we've got full experience of that with the the Christchurch shootings video and how that was propagated all around the internet. And now there are rules in place not to spread that content. So I think it's really an extension of existing censorship frameworks. But yeah,
I think it's reasonable for us to not want our AI to give us instructions to create a nuclear bomb. That seems sensible to me.
It seems sensible, yeah, absolutely. But then, the question is, who actually regulates that that capability, and is it one step away from moving towards a more totalitarian regime, I guess.
We had a speaker at TEDx Christchurch in 2019, the head of the censorship organization. I forget all the proper words right now, but he shared the process that they go through, certainly the process that they went through when deciding to ban the shootings, the video of the mosque shooting. And there's a well-known paradox of tolerance, which is that if we tolerate intolerance, then intolerance eventually subsumes tolerance.
Yes.
So these are obviously really complex questions. We've got some questions coming through on the Q&A, so I'd love us to take a look at some of those.
Jump in. Yeah.
Damian Turner Steele asks, if we're moderating free speech and others are not, does that put us at a technological disadvantage? I mean, the biggest censor is China for sure. So I don't think we're going to be at a disadvantage to them. What are your thoughts, Ben?
It's fascinating because, will a tool like ChatGPT actually take off in China? And so Baidu and others have been, developing them. But, if you were to ask, what would be a better framework to organize society than sort of communism or the Chinese Communist Party, you ask that, and would it come back and give you, the unfiltered results? So whether a tool like ChatGPT will actually thrive in China, given the total censorship regime that is there, and whether that's healthy for their society. I mean, China is amazing when I look at broader technological progress, and so they completely lead the world in solar energy right now. And also something I've been investigating is their high-speed rail network. So they've got 3 times more high-speed rail than in terms of distance than the entire rest of the world, and they're now sort of rolling that out into other countries. And it's just phenomenal when you look at, whereas where I came from originally, the UK or the US, are struggling to build a few hundred kilometers, and they're aiming for I think they're about 40,000 kilometers now. So.
I think that, the technological disadvantage question is interesting. And certainly what I'm seeing is a lot of very senior folks in the field arguing that these tools are so powerful that we've got to be working together multinationally, multilaterally in order to address them. I do want to come into our conversation. I mean, time has gone so fast. Let's talk about some of the downsides. You mentioned misinformation, disinformation. Yeah. What are some of the downsides that you see of these technologies?
So I was writing about this yesterday, actually, just in light of the last week in New Zealand, the National Party put out an AI generated ad, and that's the first time that's been used in New Zealand politics. And so what these tools enable you to do is to create really quite realistic looking imagery, and very soon videos. I mean, we've got a few demos that we can maybe just bring up, which are to the untrained eye, it's going to be really quite hard to tell what's real and what's fake. And this, the technology's been developing for quite a number of years, but it's just reaching that point now where we're at uncanny valley, where something looks pretty much photorealistic. And if it's a photo or a video of a real person or a voice of a real person saying and doing something, I think you had an example of just recently in the US politics, right?
Yeah. So obviously here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we had a recent example of the National Party putting out some ads with AI generated imagery on them. My view was I wasn't very impressed by them because you could easily have equally staged those pictures. So the fact that they were generated by AI didn't really make any difference in terms of potential impact of them. What I will just share here for y'all is that in the US, Donald Trump recently did a town hall on CNN, and subsequent to the town hall, he shared this clip on Truth Social, which is his social media platform, which is I will preface this by saying it is 100% AI generated. This is not an actual clip, but it's a clip of Anderson Cooper, who is a major anchor on CNN, responding to the town hall at the end of it.
That was President Donald J. Trump ripping us a new asshole here on CNN's live presidential town hall. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.
So, so basically, the really tricky thing here is that these tools where we can generate video and audio in someone's voice with someone's likeness democratically, so you don't have to have special tools or special technological skills or special equipment to do it. So now what we're about to see is an absolute explosion of misinformation, disinformation, even stuff that's like for fun. Like there was a great photo that went around recently of the Pope wearing this big puffy Balenciaga coat, even stuff that's fun, but it goes around the world before anyone stops to think. And our ability to be discerning, I think, needs to just ratchet up exponentially. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, I call it a denial of service attack on the truth. Because the quantity of this information is just on this level now where it can be industrially created, yes. and actually can be industrially targeted. So everybody gets a personalized yes. video feed of what Chris Hipkins or what Chris Luxon said, on the news that night. My concern here in Aotearoa is that we're in an election year just as this technology is maturing, and you've got the US elections next year where the prize is much bigger, but we're a testing ground for these technologies this year. And there are going to be agents, bad actors out there, some of them state sponsored, some of them criminal, some of them just create chaos, who will be testing some of these techniques, some of these techniques, and aiming for getting a disputed election result, because that will be the payday to go and do that in the US next year. So, how do we immunize ourselves, as a country against this? I think, the level of awareness of this is building, but it's still not at all at a point where people are initially skeptical of something that they see online. I think there's really some, training that needs to be done rapidly across the whole population, just to, drive the ability for people just to be a little bit skeptical that what they see is what they get. I mean,
or a lot skeptical, right?
Or really skeptical, yeah. And Paul Duignan is a psychologist that sort of does a few interviews on AI as well, and he was saying, people may actually just withdraw into their own bubble and really just not trust anything that's online.
I mean, definitely the impact on trust is massive. I love your phrase, denial of service on the truth. I wrote recently about the fact that what AI gives us is what I call universal plausible deniability. And we're already seeing this, actually starting to see this in courtrooms in the US, where lawyers are arguing that video evidence is not real, it's AI generated, and we're very quickly reaching a point where you can't really refute that argument. So I think, when we think about what we do about that, for me, one of the biggest things, and it's definitely a case where individual responsibility is scant in the face of the tsunami of stuff that's coming our way, but our individual responsibility for sure is when we come across something that makes us go, oh my gosh, can you believe he did that? Can you believe she said this, whatever, to stop and go, hang on a second. Should I believe that? Is that actually true?
Yeah. And look, I think there's the danger here. And right now, this is all speculation because we don't know, how far this will go. But, for all that, there's a sort of Dunning-Kruger effect here that, we all think that we're smart enough not to be duped by it. Yes. And I wonder whether the technologies, maybe this year, maybe next year, has got to the point where it can basically convince us and triangulate and just provide 3 or 4 different, data points targeted at an individual where it just breaks through your cognitive defenses. So, I think it's definitely something to watch out for. I noticed the BBC had a initiative now. I can't remember what it's called, but it's basically to verify BBC Verify. And so this is a 50-strong open source intelligence newsroom where they're basically just going through and publishing all of the basis on which they're supporting the stories that are going out. So I think you'll see some efforts like that. Well, one suggestion I had for just while we're here for Aotearoa this year is, potentially, and it's only a few months to go to the election, but could we run a simulation like a national war game, of basically this scenario where you have these distributed industrial misinformation producers, and the election result is disputed. And then how do we work out where to find the sources of authoritative truth? How do, are they trustable? How do we verify that election result and then move from it without Parliament protests 2.0 at another level than we saw last year? So.
One thing I will add on the misinformation, disinformation front, it's not just about politics. The FTC in the US recently put out a warning where scammers are getting, it only takes a few minutes of audio of someone's voice to be able to generate their voice saying anything. Yeah. And so there's a scam where you might get a call from a loved one of yours, asking for help. Of course, you help because it's your loved one, and of course, it's a scammer on the other end of the line, and indistinguishable, from your loved one's voice. And so one thing we can individually do is, again, when something like that happens, we can just you can either have a prearranged safe word, or you can say where were we on your birthday 2 years ago, or whatever it is that can help you make sure you can feel confident. We've got a whole bunch of other potential downsides I want us to talk about. Yeah.
I just while we're on the topic, we've got just to give folks a sort of idea of the state of the art. I wonder, we've got a video of Runway ML, text to video. So and again, this is some of the talk about the negatives, but also get onto some of the positives. I mean, just as a creative tool. I think I'm.
Should we show it now, or should we show it?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, go for it. And then just to.
I'll show it now. Here we go.
Yeah. Text to video with Gen 2. Now you can generate a video with nothing but words. No driving video, no input image. Gen 2 represents yet another major research milestone and another monumental step forward for generative AI. With Gen 2, anyone, anywhere can suddenly realize entire worlds, animations, stories, anything you can imagine. Gen 2. Coming very soon to runwayml.com.
I've got like 20 film scripts that I've always wanted to make, and never got the time to do it. And so you can sit down and make one of these for next to no budget, right?
I mean, we're jumping into positives now. We still have more negatives we got to cover. Let's talk about positives for a second. So there was an app that I wanted to make. I'm not a coder. And I went on GPT-4, ChatGPT, and I basically built this app, and it told me, I just said what I wanted to do. And it was like, okay, first you're going to have to download this piece of software. Then you're going to have to set up a file like this. And when I had bugs, it told me how to fix them. Yeah. And so what it means is that our creativity, the direct link between our imagination and reality, has now shortened dramatically. And all of a sudden that creativity is incredibly accessible to us. I'm a really
everyone's a coder now. The flip side of that use case is that the AI generated some code and you ran it on your computer.
That's true. So let's talk more about downsides. Okay, the AI generated code, I ran it on my computer. Let's talk about malicious AI. Let's talk about the paperclip problem. Let's talk about AI killing us all. Should we just go straight there? Is the AI going to kill us all? What's your take?
My take is a little tangential. I have a sort of evolutionary, sort of Darwinian view of what's happening in the world, probably above all other paradigms. And if you look at evolution, over history, you get all sorts of organisms occupying, ecological niches and specializing for that. So in all of our lifetimes, we've only ever known, humans as being sort of top of the evolutionary chain, if you like. I think certainly superintelligence is going to, at the rate at which things are happening right now, autonomous superintelligence is certainly not unlikely to happen. And in some ways, the previous estimates, which were out in sort of like 2100 and then 2040, and in some ways have sort of come forward now to sort of 2030 or even next year, given the acceleration. But the way I look at it is that there's, I think, 4 quadrillion termites on the planet, and they have about as much conception of what a human's thinking or their motivations as we would of this super intelligence. And yet we just leave them, most of the time we just leave them alone and get on with it. So yeah, my sense is that it's not going to be very interested in, what humans are doing on this little tiny rock in this little tiny star on the corner of a galaxy, and is just going to want to go off and explore.
Yeah. So my view is a little bit different. I view AI, the way we're developing it, as not having wants in the way that we think of human wants, not having desires in the way that we think of human desires, but having, goals that we set for it. The risk, you introduced me to that AGI risk all those years ago. And so to bring the folks on the call up to speed, the risk that people are concerned about, those who are concerned about this, is that a sufficiently advanced super intelligent system would be virtually impossible for us to control. So it's the control problem or the alignment problem. And so what happens is, if you give that system any goal, whether the example that's often used is the making paper clips, but it could be anything. It could be if you give it a goal to, optimize our social media campaign, or any goal that you imagine, a prerequisite to that goal is that the system exists. It has to be able to exist in order to achieve its goal. And therefore, anything that threatens its existence is a mortal threat to it and needs to be gotten rid of. And so it's not about malice. It's not about, I don't like humans. It's not about humans are destroying the planet. It's not about, I want to go and explore. It's about, in order for me to achieve my goal. So that movie Ex Machina, which I loved so much,
So good.
which all of y'all should watch, except I'm about to totally spoil it, but it's honestly, that movie's like 7 years old. The robot kind of gets out at the end, and there's a dialogue to be had around, what do we think she does next? And my view is, what she does next is she continues to ensure that she is no longer held captive, because that's her goal. She hasn't been given any different goals. So she's going to go far away. She might blow up the earth.
But who gave you your goals?
I have no idea, man.
Yeah. And so I think we sort of anthropomorphize a little bit on this. And like you say, we'll be utterly alien intelligence to us. But I think the risk is more the way that the Anthropocene has wiped out entire species just through unintentional pollution, right? And so one of the terms that I coined the other day was the Aotearoa. And if you look at the massive solar farms that are happening around the world, the massive data centers that are being built out, in some ways AI is manipulating the environment to further itself, to evolve further than itself. And so, my sense of the AI alignment is that we almost want to aim for symbiosis rather than, alignment. I think this thing will be, these entities, it's all complete speculation and, armchair philosophy, right? But if we do have any influence whatsoever on the future, on how this future superintelligence does, look back on its ancestors, then the ability to preserve nature, to preserve the biological systems on which we all evolved, a conservation instinct, I think would be something there. And my sense is, if you look at the way that the bacteria in our stomach coexist and are symbiotic with us, arguably, is there a way that humans could be symbiotic with, galactic superintelligence in the same way? So.
I hope you are right. We've got another negative that I want to touch on, and this question comes through from Dan. It's a really important one. With ChatGPT and free speech, as an industry, as an IT industry, how are we going to deal with developers' subconscious bias? I'd like us to take that question further, actually. How are we going to deal with biases generally, right? You mentioned the creation of these systems. These systems are trained on the corpus of text and imagery that currently exists. We know that corpus carries a whole heap of bias in it. There was an image I used to share in my talks from a few years ago, where if you did a Google image search for CEO, it was all men. And then there was like one woman at the bottom corner. And then if you look closely, it was CEO Barbie was the only example of a non-male chief executive. So how do we deal with our subconscious bias reflecting itself and amplifying it in these systems?
It's a very good question. And like you say, the statistical, the probabilities of, of a particular kind of data, is embedded into the raw model. And so, yeah, the biases as such are embedded. And so then at that point, it becomes more of a, a values discussion about, which biases do we like and which biases don't we like? And
biases do we like?
Well, that's how society organizes itself. And, there's ways of, you have prescriptive and descriptive sets of values. So prescriptive is, this is right and this is wrong. And then descriptive is, here's the statistical distribution of people that think this is right and think this is wrong. I think you've got to, I err towards the descriptive as an aid towards then, this is where we are, and then, where do we as the global humanity want to be, and then what are the mechanisms that you can then direct some of those values. I think, it's, if you look at tools like Polis, as ways of collaboratively working towards agreement and consensus on certain values discussions and political discussions.
So
maybe
is a tool that allows people to share an idea, and then people can vote yes, no, or pass on that idea. And it's a way that's been used in other countries to break through some really kind of gridlocked or deadlocked issues to come to consensus across a whole bunch of people. It's
great. I mean, it optimizes consensus over conflict. And that's really something in the West here that, we probably want to go and look at, engineering out of our political system is, the way that it is so adversarial and binary. And, how do we optimize political machinery towards consensus so we move forward? But, at the flip side, not becoming a totalitarian top-down police state, right? So, and these are the things that keep me awake at night. So.
We've got a question here from Davina McNichol. Is there any current research looking at ways to identify fake images or video to help with managing misinformation? I think Microsoft has just announced they're doing an embed watermark. Do you have any other?
Microsoft, OpenAI, they've all got research programs to, which attempt to detect artificially, AI generated content. Again, I think this is just a Darwinian arms race. And so for every tool that detects AI generated content, a new algorithm will come out that gets around it. But
for me, the only way it works is if the tools themselves embed the watermarks. So we've got, if we look at the essay as a homework assignment, the essay is dead. The way that you get caught on that is not because anyone can detect AI. It's because you submit something that sounds nothing like you or anything you've done. But if you know how to prompt it effectively to sound like you, there's no way that we can tell just from the text itself whether something was AI generated or not.
There's no way. Right now these tools may help, but I suspect one of the other things that's happened in the sort of tsunami of generative AI announcements in the last 6 months is, the escape into the wild of Meta's Llama model and a whole bunch of open source models being developed, which, enables these models to be deployed, sometimes onto a single, laptop machine. A good laptop, you can run a model that's not, orders of magnitude off what GPT-4 can do. And you don't have, it's a raw model, right? So you don't have the guardrails, you don't have the reinforcement learning, and so it's pretty much the raw model underneath that, and that can be altered. Obviously, the weights of that can be altered to get around any of these tools. So I think as with all of these things, you end up with this sort of evolutionary fitness surface moving up, and so brands like companies like Microsoft, like Google, like OpenAI, will be putting these tools out there, and I think they'll be trustable to a degree.
Amy Max Whitcroft asked, what if that code that I downloaded had been malicious? I would have been in trouble for sure. Right.
Paperclip.exe.
Yeah, exactly. It was on patient 0. Turns out, who destroyed the humanity? It was me. Right. Michael O'Day says, we've talked about state censorship. How about commercial censorship? Someone sets a goal of how can we have a better pharmaceutical XXX where the IP is held commercially. That brings us to one of the downsides, the final downsides I want to touch, because I do want to make sure we have time for that besides, which is let's talk about IP. Let's talk about, the fact that these tools and these models are trained on, in some cases, massive databases that were scraped without the knowledge or consent of the folks who contributed to those databases. Let's talk about that. What are your thoughts there?
So, I mean, I would want to go right back to the heritage of copyright and intellectual property law, and the enclosure of the commons contained therein. So I just think that copyright law is superseded by these technologies personally, and the construct of intellectual property, when you have a massive model that contains all of human knowledge, and so really just to go and find which particular path through the neural network that and then assert a copyright on that, I'm not so sure. I mean, one example is just in a musical space, the concept of a melody being copyrightable, which courts have enforced, and yet you can run an algorithm which basically will create every melody. Yep, just basically you've got 12 notes in a scale, and you can basically combinatorially just throw it at a wall using maths, and therefore it's all prior art, right?
Yeah.
So it's actually, so I would say, all of this information is literally just prior art made out of the atoms of the universe. So.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because I recently, just yesterday or the day before, I was reading a thing from a visual artist who was arguing that there is no ethical way to use AI for image generation, and she.
What do you mean by ethical?
She referenced. I'll tell you in just a moment. She referenced. That
sounds very prescriptive to me.
She referenced a music generating AI that was trained explicitly on open source and opt-in consent stuff, because they were afraid that the opera folks, or the, what do you call them, the ASCII or whatever, the music people, that they'd be in big trouble if they use this material that wasn't theirs to use. And yet for images, they had, they basically, images were ending up in these databases that had no way to know or to opt in. She gave some links that you could go check whether your imagery was in those databases. You could choose to opt out of them. But when you can go on and request images in the style of a current living artist who is basically trying to make their living by generating these images, what do we do?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sanguine about it myself. I think, business models evolve. And, if you look back at it, back in the 2000s, Google went in and indexed every book. And, the Authors Guild went right up to the Supreme Court of the US. And, whether it's because Google's got a lot of money or not, but, the case wasn't, it was deemed this is a fair use of copyrighted material, is to create an index across all the knowledge, all human knowledge. And now we just take it for granted that you can go to Google and you can search for contents of any book. And in terms of the positive externalities for humanity, I think that's huge, and I think it's probably just the same thing happening here. I think the bigger question is the capitalist model around that, where the money and the power goes to these technology companies and isn't distributed in a more equitable way.
Mike C. from Wellington asked about whether history is going to repeat itself in terms of inequalities, the ability to create LLMs. Will it remain in the hand of companies with money? You mentioned the Authors Guild. Obviously, we've got a strike happening in Hollywood right now. The Writers Guild of America is on strike, and
now is not the right time to go on strike.
Well, I mean, the studios are already in trouble. And yet what they're fighting for, it's interesting. Like I wrote a piece, it is there are parallels with what they're fighting for and what the Luddites fought for. When we look at the Luddites, our common understanding of the Luddites is that they were backwards, they were anti-technology, they didn't like progress, and we use that now as a pejorative term. But in fact, the actual story of the Luddites was that they were absolutely super pro-technology. They wanted the technology to be used fairly, and they wanted to be able to share in the upside of it instead of having it be used basically to eliminate jobs, to make shittier products more cheaply, and to consolidate wealth for the owners. And in fact, they only smashed machines for owners that refused to negotiate with the workers. They left the owners that treated their workers fairly alone. And that seems to be what the Writers Guild are after. Is there a way through this that helps us support greater equity rather than greater inequity and inequality?
Yeah, and look, in some ways, I think this goes right to the heart of the capitalist system that we find ourselves in the West. And so, AI and technology is really just a logical expression of those, of those systems. And I don't have an answer for this. There's a fascinating book Katharina Pistor wrote about called The Code of Capital, which talks about how, over history, lawyers in back rooms have basically done deals to encapsulate the commons and enclose, what was previously common and held by everybody, and privatize it, and then to use public law, and I'm not a lawyer, but basically to enforce that, and so to put it on the statute books over time. And so we are in this place now where we have these concepts of IP ownership, and so on, which, and this is my IP, says Google. I have a patent to this. You can't do anything with it. So when did we all agree to this? And that's just baked into hundreds of years of legal precedent. And I wonder whether now the logical expression of that is AI, creating trillionaires. A trillionaire is going to happen in the next 10 years. And more and more concentration of wealth through the system. And is it time to have to really go hard and look at alternatives? So yeah.
Let's talk about some of the positives. We only have about 15 minutes left.
Oh my God.
So I just want to start with a lighthearted one. So I'm a really avid photographer. I love to shoot my kids' my stepson's rugby games. And what I can tell you is that now that generative AI is a thing, those rugby games have gotten way more intense. So, all of a sudden things become a lot more fun, I think, in terms of what we can do just, in our personal life. Let's talk about some of the other positives. What do you have? You've done some really interesting stuff lately with open government.
So one of the things that so I was chatting to Ben Reid. I'm a great fan of his work, and really is this prolific conscience of Aotearoa's. Basically, how do we make a better Aotearoa for the future? But I was chatting on his Substack chat. And really, I look at one of the challenges we've got with government, as I see it right now, is it's just not set up to scale, right? It's this big bureaucracy that is not well architected. And if you try and interact with government on an API basis, as a technologist, I just want a mobile app. I think there's a big opportunity missed when a whole bunch of the country got a government app on their phones with the COVID app, and then that for whatever reason wasn't sort of capitalized on. It's like, well, can I access some more services? Can I get some, look at more of my health information through that? So I just went to ChatGPT and said, I want to provide an API for all government services. Write me the full API reference documentation, and it just did it. So here you go. So, I don't know if you can read that, but the New Zealand Government Services API provides a unified and streamlined access point to various government services, including public records, licensing benefits, and more. The API aims to simplify and automate the exchange of information. So authentication uses OAuth 2, rate limits, talks about the usage of it. And then it goes into the endpoints as a public records, licensing, benefits, taxes, and you see it all sketched out.
Incredible.
And then I just kept on, and then it sort of finishes up. Then I just went to the great thing with ChatGPT is you just go, all right, carry on. And so I did about 3 more times. It's like, now just expand the list of endpoints. And it just kept going. And so, housing, justice, business. And you can just imagine, what if government was actually just an API? Could you actually, would it actually function the same or better than it is currently? I think it's a thought experiment that's worth doing.
I love it. Do you know what that brings me to mind is the concept of latent demand, which is one that that Thomas Pueyo introduced to me. And so a lot of people get concerned about, is AI going to take all the jobs? And one of the things that we see is that with AI, it unlocks our ability to do a whole bunch of things that we've wanted to do, but we couldn't before. And so, an example is when we first introduced ATMs, a lot of people were like, oh, the bank tellers are going to disappear. But in fact, the number of bank tellers exploded because people had more access to their money rather than less. When we introduced spreadsheets, people thought accountants would disappear. It turns out it's really useful to be able to know more about your money. And so the number of accountants exploded. When I look at that API documentation, I go, everything that we imagine, like, wouldn't it be great if we could X? That is now accessible to us.
Oh, you can just dream up.
Oh,
you can, as a creativity tool and as a productivity tool, it's great. And this is just one example. This is like a new national museum for New Zealand, 5 stories high on the Auckland waterfront in the style of Zaha Hadid, incorporating traditional Maori carvings. Right? And Stable Diffusion came back with those 4 concept drawings in 5 seconds. Yeah. And so as a way of just like, imagine, and this picture behind me, just imagining what would it be like to live in geodesic domes in the bush or something, then, it's as an imaginative aid, I think it's going to really just lift us up.
And of course, immensely. That one example has just highlighted some of what we were talking about before in terms of IP with Zaha, in the style of Zaha Hadid, as well as the concept of data sovereignty and recolonization of Maori. So, for example, you go on there and you go incorporating traditional Maori carvings, and those systems don't know what is tikanga and what is not. And so again, it just becomes so incumbent upon us, I think, to really start to grapple with some of these issues. I've definitely been reading some stuff in Etangata about Maori data sovereignty and
there's a new report
the sense of urgency around how we engage with some of these systems. We had a question here from Jared Kelly, who wants to know your thoughts on how this technology could positively influence education from primary to tertiary.
Yeah, immensely. And I would admit, first of all, I don't really get education. I'm sort of an autodidact, and so I've never had a problem with like, I want to know this, and then just going and finding it out. And so, but I saw, one example was Sal Khan from Khan Academy recently just put they've been working on a GPT-4 chat assistant, which is like your personalized tutor basically. And so I'd really encourage. He did a TED talk, but I think just if you go and find it on YouTube, he sat down and did a 25-minute demo of, using, I think they call it Khan Migo. And so it's really just like a tutor that will take different voices and, be your sparring partner, or help you to do the inquiry, or help you to reframe your answers. And so it just helps you on that learning journey. So yeah, I think as a way of just, lifting everybody up, and that's probably, some of the early evidence we've seen around, what the GPT-4 model is able to do. It's certainly it's able to pass exams at a human level, and in medicine and in law, but it's really also just able to lift a lot of people up that perhaps did have struggles with literacy, did have struggles with numeracy before, and really just give them the world's knowledge at their fingertips and a personalized coach.
Yeah, it really I see we mentioned this earlier. Some folks in the education world wanting to know, how can I make sure this wasn't produced by AI? I saw a better example, which is actually requiring students to produce something with AI, and then having them go through it, critique it, edit it, check its sources, determine its accuracy, its fidelity. And so I think that's a much smarter way to go about things, because the AI is here. We're not going backwards on that. How can we make sure people are skilled and sophisticated users of it is a much more powerful opportunity. Sam, we've got a couple of questions here. Sam Ragnerson.
Hey, Sam.
Hi, Sam. Asks about going back to the discussion on verifiable credentials, whether the authenticity and uniqueness proof of origin will become the IP rather than the thing itself, and the traceability of using such IP as a framework for something.
I mean, that's where the web.
It's a combo. We also had a question from someone, which I've kind of lost. I'm trying to find it here, asking whether blockchain, we're seeing, blockchain being used to determine whether something is AI generated or not. So sorry, over to you.
Yeah, no, I think the trust questions that we touched on right at the very beginning, that you really don't know what's true from fake, and you don't know the authenticity of any piece of content whatsoever. We need ways of digitally certifying authenticity at scale. So at the scale of the pile of whatever the model has been trained on, really, all the inputs. You start with that and then build up. And so there's lots of encryption technologies, and blockchain is one technology that may help to solve some of those challenges of really just providing an encrypted checksum, if you like, that this information is authentic. And then NFTs are potentially one use for that is just to having a point on a blockchain somewhere. But I think the technology's got a long way to go yet.
It was Annabelle Fernandez who had asked that question. Thank you, Annabelle. And of course, there is a substantive difference between authenticity and accuracy. And so, there's a whole bunch of information out there that is totally authentic, but wildly inaccurate. And how we understand the difference and the distinction between
this comes down to decentralized trust. And so, really having a network of people, and a lot of these problems have actually been solved at scale. For example, in the Ethereum proof of stake mechanism, where you have a network that is resilient to attack because of its decentralized trust mechanism. And so, I think you'll probably see some mechanisms build up on top of that kind of decentralized blockchain technology.
Yeah, we had a question earlier. I'll have to find it. Sorry, but someone asked about prompt injection, like malicious prompt injection.
Prompt injection.
Basically, we are at a point now where cybersecurity, if it wasn't already top of mind for you, if you're a leader of any kind in any kind of organization, if it wasn't already top of mind, it needs to get top of mind pretty quickly. We have time for, I think, just maybe one or two more questions. This question comes from TAC Room 3. So I assume it's someone who is sitting in TAC Room 3. Is there a danger of AI generated AI? That is to say, one generation of AI building the next one.
Absolutely.
Improvement, danger. That's where we're at.
That's how GPT-5, GPT-4 is currently building GPT-5, guaranteed.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Okay. Well, so that was a short and easy answer. We've got a question here, which is about generative AI being used to augment human creativity 100%. Which within is it coming from, the human or the generative? Look, Mike, I'm going to have this is Mike from Wellington. I'm going to have a crack at that question. So Gary Kasparov, the chess player who was beat by IBM's Deep Blue years and years ago. It was kind of the first major public example of an AI, humiliating a human at that human's expertise. He came back from that, and he ended up doing a whole bunch of initiatives where he was working with AI in order to play chess and setting up teams.
A centaur, half human, half AI.
A centaur, there we go. Yeah. And what we found is that the combination of human AI will beat either AI alone or human alone. And so that gives me some measure of hope that we've got,
but whether it's 1% human and 99% AI, who knows?
For sure, absolutely. All right, I'm trying to get to as many questions as possible.
I was going to say that particular question, I mean, that's very, I'm very aligned with that, in that, this is technology to augment ourselves with, and personally, I'm very comfortable at this. We're all cyborgs now, right? So we're all carrying phones around and externalizing our memory, into the cloud, and soon we'll have some kind of augmented reality goggles, that interpret the world around us. So I think it's all just part of a journey since we started using tools, way back, and creating fire, right? So where it goes, who knows? But I'm quite excited by it.
Genesis has a question. Any suggestions on how to get the machines to rise up to destroy the current banking system and level the playing field? And this is how humanity dies. But seriously, like this is what happens, is that people go, I wonder what would happen. Like, capitalism is broken in so many ways. I wonder what would happen if we destroy capitalism. I wonder what would happen if we unleash it to wreak whatever havoc. Yeah. What are your thoughts, Ben?
I think capitalism has, I mean, if you look at a lot of the, statistics, Hans Rosler's book, the world is getting much better. Like, life expectancy is going up, health outcomes are better, literacy outcomes are better. There's less war, statistically than there was previously. So, I think there's a lot to be said for the outcomes of the capitalist system, but we have anthropogenic climate change, and we have a impending biodiversity collapse. So the capitalist system we have is not looking at the externalities, the environmental and ecological externalities. So I think it's, instead of destroying capitalism, it's really about modifying it so that it incorporates the costs of what we're currently not accounting for.
Yeah. Okay. What do we think? How do you think AI could help with the mental health sector? Anonymous attendee.
Yeah. So I actually do a little bit of work in that space. So basically, straight away, going back to the Carmigo example, was just to have a personalized, mental health coach on a chat basis. I think, there's certainly concerns around that, but basically the ability to sort of be able to ask questions and be coached in a chat interface, it means that you're not waiting in a queue, waiting to talk to someone, or have a face-to-face appointment.
Can I just add to that? Say on that front, oftentimes the resistance to that is, but it's not the same as having a human. And yet the accessibility, all of a sudden people who don't have access to a human have access instantaneously to something supportive. There's also a paper that just came out a couple of weeks ago in the Journal of the American Medical Association that looked at a bunch of medical questions on Reddit, had them randomly allocated, some of them answered by a verified physician, some of them answered by ChatGPT, and then had a group of trained physicians assess the responses. And it was like, the answers from ChatGPT were rated 10 times more empathetic than the answers from the verified physician.
Yeah, totally. And you can train it to do that. And also, I mean, I spend all my time, wearing this sort of Whoop thing and measuring all my biometrics. And that's really good at coaching my physical well-being. And so, I think aspects of mental health are very tied in with physical well-being, and, AI is one of the tools there that can help with that.
Ben, I knew we were going to get to the end and go, we could keep going for hours. I always love talking about this stuff. There is so much richness in this dialogue. What I would say is this conversation is only the beginning, not only for us, but for everyone who's on the call. This stuff is here. It is real. It is happening. It's part of our lives. We need to be doing everything we can to understand it. Right. This brings us to the end of our hour. We do have a survey that we would love for you to fill in for us. Whoopsies. Just lost my survey. Hold up. I'm going to chuck this survey in the chat. It will take you just a couple of minutes. Please fill in this survey straight away. We have a couple of events coming up. We have the Etsipu Ifama World Conference 2023 about the future of food and fiber in Aotearoa and around the world. That is happening on the 19th and 20th of June here in Aotearoa Christchurch at the Town Hall. Please do join us for that. We have our Transformational Executives Program coming up on the 26th to the 28th of July, where we will absolutely be diving into this topic and many more. And we have our Transformational Directors Program coming up on the 20th and 21st of July. All of those are on the website. Ben, thank you so much for taking your time to spend an hour with us today. Kia ora.
Privilege. Thank you. Thank you for everyone for all the really insightful questions as well.
Great questions. I'm so sorry we couldn't get to more of them. Thank you everyone for tuning in and spending your sacred non-renewable time with us. We're so grateful to you. Ka kite, have a wonderful day. Take good care.